Welcome back to Good Evening. Now it's time for When Monet Meets Debussy. And Christine joins us every Wednesday to bring us into the art world and share some interesting artwork and especially some interesting facts about the artists who make them. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you here again.
I'm glad to be back in this seat doing some art talk. I missed it quite a bit, but I did get to hear a lot of the other interesting works that you talked about in the past couple weeks. I'm a little jealous.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get right back into it. And we're talking about some really important stuff tonight. So the work we're talking about tonight happened at the turn of the century, and it marked a shift in the way that we understand and interact with what we call art. So this sculpture single-handedly has come to be deemed as the most influential work in the 20th century.
So we're looking at the most influential, the one that changed everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big claim, but I think it's been titled that because it goes beyond the object itself and even the artist himself. Its impact comes from what it has come to represent in the imagination of the modern-day audience and how it embodies our understanding of the meaning of art today.
Oh, wow. I'm excited to hear about it.
A pristine white porcelain object, shaped like an open vessel, is framed by two perpendicular sides from the back to the bottom. A rounded surface lies on top of the pedestal, while a semi-cylindrical face stands joined to it vertically, providing a backing that forms a chair-like L shape. From the front, the two sides come together with a curvy pear-shaped opening in the size of a bicycle seat turned on its back. There is a bottom rim, the height of maybe 3 fingers with 2 horizontal lines running across it, and a short spout centered in the middle facing the viewer. On each side, there are 2 small flaps flat against the pedestal like 2 handles, each with 2 small holes. The holes seem to provide an option to secure the structure to a surface using metal hardware, but they are left open. Coming down from the top of the backside are 4 more smaller holes, vertically lined and centered. At the bottom of the backside are another 6 holes of the same size stacked in a triangular form, also centered in the middle. Everything is perfectly symmetrical and measured, manufactured to fit predetermined dimensions. The only sign of a human hand on this white porcelain structure is a signature and date on the left side of the bottom rim in black paint, which reads R. Mutt 1917.
All right, that was quite the description. You know, it almost sounded like you were describing, I guess it's measured kind of small, but I got more of a grander, description idea of it, the way that you read it. Maybe it was the background music. It sounds like a huge sculpture, but in fact, it's not so big.
No, it's not. It's something that you can carry in your hands. In fact, if you haven't been able to guess yet, we're talking about the fountain, which was created in 1917, most likely by the French-American artist Marcel Duchamps. And it is basically a urinal that's turned on its side. It's
Turned
one
on
of
its
those
side,
smaller urinals that's, put on the side that's supposed to touch the wall is the side that is on the pedestal.
Yeah, and it really is. First, I mean, it hasn't really changed the design too much from 1917 to present day, white porcelain, as you described.
Yeah.
But also, how is that art is the question.
Yeah, and so we'll be getting into it. This was actually made for an exhibition organized by the Society of Independent Artists, and the story of its rejection there has become just as big as the artwork itself.
Oh, and you mentioned it's by Marcel Duchamp, but They used that R Mutt. Is that like a fake name or pseudonym or?
Yeah, he used a pseudonym. There have been questions about whether or not R Mutt is in fact Duchamps, but a lot of the art historians agree that it is Duchamps in fact. And so the story goes back to Paris. You see, 2 years before this was created, in 1915, Duchamps was living in Paris and he decided to move to New York in hopes of finding an artist community more open and accepting of new ideas. That's because he was working in Paris as a painter and he was creating some really great works like The Nude Descending a Staircase Number 2. That's since then been called a seminal work of the turn of the century. But when he was working there, he submitted this work to the Salon des Indépendants in Paris. And the organizers there were not happy about this. They were not happy about the subject of the painting, the title of the painting, or how it reflected on them. And so they asked his brothers to have him withdraw the work just a few days before the show opened.
But he was accepted, and his brothers were, I guess, also artists, I take it?
Yes, they were. And, it's interesting because when we look at the painting now, it just looks like one of those cubist, futurist paintings. But at the time, they said it was too futurist. And this was the group that was created to provide a sort of refuge to artworks that were rejected from the official institution at the time. And because the official one at the time, the traditional salon, only accepted more traditional artworks that were realistic. But Duchamp's work, even there, was considered too radical. So when Duchamp came to New York, he started a new group, the Society of Independent Artists, and he wanted to test the waters there. And he decided not to use his own name because he was a board member and he didn't want that to affect the chances of an artwork being shown at this group.
Oh, okay.
So that's when he decided to submit this porcelain urinal turned on its side. And, it's just an ordinary piece of plumbing, but he signed it under his pseudonym, R. Mutt, and he gave it the title Fountain.
Well, that's really interesting that, just because he was rejected from one place, there's so many, kind of big turns in history that come just from a simple rejection and then pushing an artist or a person in a different way. And in this case, I mean, if he would have been accepted, maybe he wouldn't have come to New York. Maybe we wouldn't have any of this. He'd just be another artist. His art would have went in a different way.
Exactly. And, this artwork being rejected then in New York, his second rejection also changed history as well. Because, during the Society of Independent Artists show, their seminal show inaugural show in New York, all of the other 2,500 submissions were accepted, but the Fountain was not accepted. They're not supposed to have a jury. They're not supposed to have a prize. But there was a debate with the board members who said, this can't be art. And so they eventually decided to hide it from the public during the show. And, Duchamp said that his work was being suppressed. He said, because, a work can't actually be rejected by the independents, and he ended up resigning from the board.
I mean, did they know it was his, though? They didn't know it was his, so he must have just felt very strongly. But, of course, the question then was that art? Everyone wants to know that, right?
Yeah, so the committee claims, they said, it may be a very useful object in its place, but its place is not an art exhibition, and it is by no definition a work of art. And so this question of what is art has been a big issue, not just with Duchamp's works, but it's been something that artists, around that time start asking. And in the 19th century, that was the big topic of debate with the movement of modernism. And, Duchamp sort of saw artists as alchemists. So, the Fountain is one in a series of works by Duchamp called The Ready-Mades, in which he chose just ordinary manufactured objects like a bicycle wheel you might have seen or this urinal, and he turns them on the side and calls them a sculpture. And they show that, the artist's selection and choice to bring an object into a new context, in this case, the context of art, is enough to completely transform it into a new creation.
I can see that. So, there's a very strong, philosophical argument that's coming from his point of view that as long as the intention is there, that should justify what art really is. Like, you're intending it to be art, then it should be art. But a lot of people didn't agree with that. They wanted more, right? They wanted, maybe even this group, I'm sure they weren't as staunchy as the other ones as far as, accepting new ideas, maybe even painting and different styles. But this was a little bit out of their, comprehension.
Yeah, exactly. And, Duchamps said that he wasn't interested in this sort of technical savvy or craftsmanship of the artist, but rather in an artist's ability to propose new ideas and thoughts through her work. He called the other type of art retinal art, and he said they only focused on visual, but he wanted to seek other methods of expression. And like you said, I think he was seeking for some more philosophical approaches to art. And later on, after he left the group, he decided to create a new art journal with his friends. And in this publication he was involved in, his colleague Beatrice Wood wrote again about the fountain. Oh. And she said, whether Armut with his own hands made the fountain has no importance. He chose it. He took an ordinary article of life, placed it so that its useful significance disappeared under the new title and point of view, and created a new thought for the object.
That's really interesting, and I never thought about that point of if he created it or not, because I guess if someone sculpted an exact replica of a urinal, that would be art because they sculpted it and an artist created it, but just because I think that's where it caught a lot of people. Just because he went out and bought it, turned it on its side, and now that's art.
He took it from somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's a pretty crazy idea. And, after him in, decades to come, there were a lot of movements of artists doing similar things. But at the time, this was revolutionary, right? So a lot of artists later on, they would take these prefabricated objects. Some even would take photographs from advertisements and just frame it in a gallery and say, this is my artwork. There were all sorts of movements from conceptual art to other similar movements that followed actually in the 60s and 70s. So decades later. But it all started with this one man, Armut, who had an ambition.
Well, what's really funny is that when you think about, and you heard all those other different ways, people taking pictures of art and then making that art. Once this kind of idea was let loose into the collective consciousness, everyone can agree that art could be almost anything that anyone intends it to be. It opened the floodgates. And of course, not all those movements stuck around. They didn't become, big things. But still, it almost opened up like a new doorway to an art world that was previously, left untapped or unseen.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really great point. Yeah, speaking of floodgates, Duchamp also likened the fountain to an oasis. He said art is a mirage. A mirage exactly like an oasis appears in the desert. It is very beautiful until, of course, you are dying of thirst. But you don't die in the field of art. The mirage is solid. So he's, being very humorous and ironic, but he's talking about something really important. This idea that the mirage or the concept that something gives us through art could really live on beyond that artwork itself.
And, nowadays, we have the benefit of it almost being 100 years ago that this came out. And, of course, it shaped our own understanding of the art world. But it's funny that, when you think about how it progressed and how now readily we are to accept various forms of art. And there's still people pushing, that field in so many different ways. But for the think the whole history of art was just paintings and working in this very finite field. And it just took one urinal turned on its side to really open that up. Of course, it took a special person like Duchamp to really have that forethought, I guess, and see that, yeah, I mean, you can be more than just a painter. An artist can be almost like a philosopher, really, and change people's minds.
Yeah, and I think, the power of philosophy is it's nothing more than just some ideas and some words, but it's what people do with that philosophy. That's why I think in school I really enjoyed this intro-level philosophy class I took about, I think it was modern criticism or something like that. And the ideas that we learned there, I could see how much it's affecting the real world around us. And I think, artists are kind of like these magicians or hypnotists, and, hypnosis, it requires a willing participant to actually work. If you're unwilling to let it work on you, it won't. And I think the transformative power of art, it can only be completed when we have an active participation from the viewers. So I thought a lot about how, us as viewers, we are just as responsible in letting this imagination play. We take part in allowing something to be art or not art, right?
Oh, yeah. We are the ones who actually have that kind of power, right? I mean, of course, it seems like it's in the hands of art critics or, kind of other people in that world, maybe higher up. But in the end, it just comes down to the people who view it and the general public.
Yeah, and when we're, willing to engage with something that's, just a urinal maybe, with curiosity, with an open mind, and, let our thoughts and imaginations run and communicate with the artwork, we can see the true magic take place. So, what do you see when you look at the fountain? What do you imagine or what do you feel? I think that's what's most important.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. And of course, it's not just the fountain, but I don't know if you've ever seen other types of artwork in this vein. But there's always going to be a piece, I hope our listeners will get a chance to experience, that really pushes your idea of what art is. You'll look at it and be like, what? That's not art. And then, you can kind of get your mind thinking in that direction about what it is exactly.
Yeah.
Intention.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and bringing us the fountain. I'll see you back here next week.
Okay, I'll talk to you next week.